I'm a 2013 MPP graduate from Harris. I currently work as an engagement manager at Amanat. We are a small boutique government consulting firm, and we focus on strategy and operations consulting, mostly in the defense space, so for defense clients. My career was indelibly shaped, that's a tough word today, in many ways by my time at Harris and at the University of Chicago. So through Harris, I entered into a career in consulting and public policy. I made lifelong friends and connections, and I learned that the impact we as policy professionals can have on our communities and the world around us. I've been very active since Harris. I was past president of the Alumni Council. And so I always love coming back and participating in Harris events and excited to be here today and introduce Professor Benedict. So Professor Benedict, thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge with us today. Professor Benedict is a senior advisor to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists and a lecturer at the Harris School of Public Policy. From 2005 to 2015, she served as executive director and publisher of the Bulletin, the leading scholarly magazine about threats to humanity from nuclear weapons, climate change, and emerging technologies. Today, she will be discussing the relationship between the U.S. and Russia following the end of the New START treaty and reflect on the evolving situation between the U.S. and Iran, which is a really timely discussion given the current talks. So thank you again for being here today. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Professor Benedict. Oh, and you're on mute, Professor Benedict.
Oh, there we go. Thank you very much for inviting me, Nikki, and thank you for that introduction. I'm really delighted to be here today, if a little late, to talk about the New START treaty and what the future holds for nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons negotiations. And I'll touch a little bit on the Iran situation, but I want to start with a discussion of the New START treaty. I've organized my thoughts and remarks around 5 questions. What was the New START treaty? Second, why does its expiration matter? Why on earth should we care about an arms control treaty? Third, what are the likely consequences of the New START expiration? Fourth, what's next? Are there opportunities for renewed or expanded arms control measures despite the failure of this arms control treaty? And fifth, what can we do? What can you and I do? Is there a role for members of the public and hopefully for political leaders in demanding negotiations and treaties to keep us safe from the vast destruction of by nuclear weapons? So what was the New START Treaty? It was a treaty that was ratified in 2010, and it brought down the nuclear weapons to limits of 1,550 strategic nuclear weapons each in the United States and Russia. 800 delivery systems, that is, ballistic missiles, submarine-launched missiles, and heavy bombers that would deliver bombs anywhere in the world. It also provided for verification of these limits, including mutual on-site inspections, which continued until about 2020 when COVID made it more difficult, and they haven't been resumed, unfortunately. But they also provided for data exchanges between Russia and the United States and transparency. There was continuous contact and meetings and resolution of conflicts in a formal meeting that was held twice every year to go over what any problems that people had and to try and resolve those problems on the spot. There were notifications of activity. For instance, we would tell each other that we were going to be testing missiles by launching them, and also notify the other side of heavy bomber movements, which could look like the preparations for a nuclear war. And so these reduce the risk of misperception and of accidental launch of nuclear weapons. The treaty wasn't perfect. No treaty is. There were no limits on tactical nuclear weapons. Russia especially did not want to have limits on these weapons, and they have at least 1,000 and perhaps as many as 2,000 weapons, which they have threatened to use in the current Ukraine war against the United States and allies if those countries were involved in defending Ukraine in robust fashion. The US has a few hundred of these so-called tactical nuclear weapons. We have 100 placed in Europe now, mostly in Turkey and in other countries in Europe. There also were no limits on missile defense. So the US would have liked to have addressed the problem of tactical nuclear weapons, especially since Russia has so many. And the Russians, in turn, also wanted the United States to limit its missile defense capability. And so those were the issues that we just couldn't agree on, couldn't even talk about in those negotiations. It is the case that Russia has offered to abide by the limits of the New START treaty for 1 year if the United States reciprocates. And in fact, President Putin sent a formal request to the United States, but the Trump administration simply ignored it and hasn't responded at all. So why does this expiration matter? Why should we care about the Arms Control Treaty? It is the last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the United States and Russia. And it was really the culmination of about 50 years of nuclear weapons negotiations and treaties. In 1987, the United States and Russia had about 70,000 nuclear weapons. And so, over the several years since 1987, with the end of the Cold War, with various treaties and negotiations and unilateral moves, we've moved down to 10,000 nuclear weapons. So, that's a huge reduction. So, the ability for two countries, former enemies, perhaps even certainly adversaries now, to bring down their nuclear arsenals to that extent, I think, is a testimony to the success of these kinds of negotiations. Now, as of February 5th, there are no agreed limits on nuclear weapons between the two largest nuclear powers. Other countries have nuclear weapons, but none as large as the arsenals in the United States and Russia. Perhaps more important, maybe, is it's that this expiration is symptomatic of a kind of steady erosion of treaties over the last 50 years or so. Most recently, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty was abrogated in 2002 by the United States. We felt that it wasn't necessary. The Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was negotiated after the end of the Cold War, is also now no longer in force. The United States pulled out because they felt Russia was violating the treaty, and so we no longer have that. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which was negotiated among nearly all countries of the world, is not in force because the United States has not ratified it, even though we did sign it, and in fact were the instigators of it. We continue to have an informal moratorium on nuclear testing, but our current President Trump has indicated that we may need to go back to testing nuclear weapons. So why should we care? Why should we care about nuclear weapons in the first place? And certainly, why should we care whether there are arms control negotiations? Nuclear weapons are the most destructive technology on Earth. And well, many of you have seen images of Hiroshima, perhaps you've even visited, and images of Nagasaki at the end of World War II when the United States dropped bombs on these two cities it was thought to help bring an end to the Second World War and the war in the Pacific. Many people died. As many as 140,000 people died 90,000 died probably instantly in Hiroshima, and another 50,000 from cancer deaths after, and from injuries from the blast. Nagasaki, about 90,000 died in just one bomb dropping on that city. And we've learned much more. That's used and is deployed is 300 kilotons. If one were used in New York City, over 1 million people would die just from one bomb. 2 million would be injured, most likely. And in a global war between the United States and Russia, the war plans of each of these countries, which we've had some access to, some experts have had access to, the war plans call for some 4,000 100-kiloton bombs, which would result in 360 million immediate deaths. And the population of the United States is 330 million, so 360 million is a lot of people. In addition, there's been work that shows the effects of a nuclear exchange of as few as 100 bombs. The soot lofting from urban fires into the atmosphere would block the sun's rays, would cool the earth, and would bring about agricultural collapse. There would be no photosynthesis. And that in turn would bring about a famine. And it's estimated that up to 5 billion people would die of starvation. So curbing these weapons, I hope you'll agree, and preventing their use is a priority and has been a priority for administrations in the United States and in the Soviet Union and Russia for some time. So then what are the United States and Russia? It's likely there will be a nuclear arms race. We're already seeing buildups of nuclear weapons in Russia and modernization of nuclear weapons here in the United States to the tune of about $1.5 trillion over the next 20 years or so. So there are no limits, really, on the number of nuclear weapons that these two countries can possess. In addition, China has been increasing its arsenal. It's rather small, from 300 nuclear weapons up to as many as 600 nuclear weapons in the last 8 to 10 years. The U.S. military intelligence projects or estimates that China will probably get to about 1,000 nuclear weapons by 2030. So an arms race may be in the offing. More money will be spent on nuclear weapons and new systems for delivery, including submarine-launched weapons, so-called hypersonic weapons, and other kinds of technologies. There will be no ongoing negotiations. Reduced communications and transparency. We'll know less about each other's arsenals and what we might be planning to do. Course is already being tested. Through miscommunication, kind of accident, as well as through intention. We're also losing experts in arms negotiations, some to retirement. And because there have been fewer negotiations recently, there are just fewer people who are engaged in them and who are developing the skills for future talks. Beyond the U.S. and Russia, though, there also may be consequences which we need to pay attention to. The Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, which came into force in 1970, has prevented the proliferation of nuclear weapons beyond the 9 existing nuclear weapons states right now. There will be a conference in April or May of this year And already the non-nuclear weapon states are complaining, frankly, that the nuclear weapon states are not really holding up their end of what was called a grand bargain. And the bargain was that non-nuclear weapon states would not try and develop their own nuclear weapons programs. In return, they would have access to civilian nuclear power technology and would be able to develop their own civilian nuclear programs for electricity generation. Uh, in exchange, another part of it was that the nuclear weapons states, in turn, would pledge to disarm, to, in the words of the treaty, pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament. And the non-nuclear weapon states now see that the United States, Russia, and China seem to be on a path to increasing their nuclear weapons. And other states as well are interested in increasing them. So the proliferation risk also may be a consequence of this expiration of the New START treaty. In other words, other countries will be interested in acquiring their own nuclear weapons. And countries like Japan and South Korea already have their own fissile material, the material that they would need to make a nuclear bomb, and they have the engineering skill and equipment and resources to do that. So what's next? And maybe I should say a word here about Iran, actually. The United States is now threatening to bomb Iran. They are in negotiations with Iran about Iran's nuclear stance. The nuclear weapons ambitions of Iran have never been terrifically clear. They have wanted and they have succeeded in enriching uranium, at least for civilian nuclear use, which is their right under the NPT. They are a member, they have been a member in good standing of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. But they've been ambiguous about their interest in nuclear weapons. Israel, their competitor, has never signed the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, and we understand that their arsenal is about 800 nuclear weapons. So they have enough nuclear weapons to wreak havoc, obviously, in the Middle East. And Iran has felt threatened at various points in its recent history by the United States and have sought, we think, to enrich uranium to a level that would allow them then to make nuclear weapons. They do not have nuclear weapons now, and the recent earlier bombings of facilities there make it very unlikely that they have the capacity right now even to build nuclear weapons. The Israelis have assassinated several of their high-level scientists in an effort to reduce the chances that Iran will get a nuclear weapon. There was a treaty in place, as many of you may know, called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that was negotiated under the Obama administration. And it actually placed quite severe penalties on Iran and involved very robust measures of verification. The International Atomic Energy Agency was actually located in the Iran nuclear facilities. There were tags placed and seals placed so that material couldn't go awry and be used for some nuclear weapons program. The first Trump administration took us out of that Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And so the Iranians felt at that point that the U.S. wasn't particularly serious about it or thought that they would get a better deal, I guess. And so IEA inspectors are no longer there. And the Iranians have threatened to increase their nuclear stock. And so that's been the reason now that the Trump administration says that it wants to bomb Iran in order to destroy its nuclear weapons facilities. I'd be happy to answer questions too in the Q&A about what the prospects are for that region of the world. So uh, what's next then? Are there opportunities that people see, that experts see, for a renewed or even expanded arms control measures just because this one has failed and the parties don't seem to be terribly interested? Are there ways in which new negotiations could happen, and what would they look like? And there are some who had been critical, some experts who had been critical of the New START treaty because it focused on numbers. And they saw that there were new challenges that needed to be addressed in nuclear weapons. So a new treaty with kind of new understandings might focus on the weapons use and their control rather than just the numbers. So if we could agree on some shared principles about their use, for instance, de-emphasizing what's called prompt launch or launch on warning, that would be very useful. It would reduce the risk of an accidental launch or one based on misperception and miscommunication. As background, right now, the United States and Russia have their nuclear weapons ready to be launched within half an hour of a command. And these weapons take about a half an hour to get to their targets, so that if we see missiles coming from Russia or China or perhaps even North Korea, even before they land on U.S. territory, we would launch a barrage of intercontinental ballistic missiles in order to get to the targets where we thought the missiles were coming from. There have been false alarms, and there have been false detections of missiles coming across essentially the Arctic in the Russia-U.S. case. And only because humans were involved and thought that this was an unlikely possibility did we escape an accidental nuclear war. So taking the weapons off of this prompt launch would give more time, more deliberation time for leaders to understand what's going on and reduce the chances of an accidental launch of nuclear weapons. Another aspect of the treaty might be to agree that we would insulate human judgment and decision-making from AI, artificial intelligence pressures. Artificial intelligence is already being used in aspects of military command and control and aspects of our nuclear arsenals. To get some clarity about what the limits are to artificial intelligence and how it should be used in decision-making would be crisis communication mechanisms. The U.S. Did have a center that was dedicated solely to communicating with the United States. I understand now that some of the funding of that has dissipated, and so our communications mechanisms are less robust and less available even before the treaty ended, and I assume they'll be less so after the treaty. All of these would really be especially important at a time of growing and greater uncertainty in geopolitical relations. As I said, China is increasing its arsenals. There are continuing cyber threats against the U.S. command and control. I've been told as many as 1 million cyber attacks a day on the U.S. command and control system, which is the way we ensure that they're not launched without some kind of command, and will launch if there is a command. So the cyber threat is real and needs to be addressed as well. And as I suggested, the use of artificial intelligence and command and control needs to be somehow limited, certainly limited. There are also integration of conventional and nuclear weapons, which can be very confusing to an adversary if they can't tell whether a ballistic missile is just a conventional warhead or has a nuclear warhead on it. It makes it more likely that a nuclear war could start if they mistake a conventional ballistic missile for a nuclear. Develop their own nuclear weapons, which is the reason you want to stop testing. And countries also need to revisit the Outer Space Treaty, which was signed in the 1960s, to make sure that no weapons are used in space. There are many assets now, many more assets now, as you know, for communications and in space now. We all use GPS, of course, which is based on satellites in space. So lower space orbit needs much more attention. And those could also be part of some new arms control agreements. Um, the other aspect of this is that even if you don't come to agreement, the negotiations themselves help to manage uncertainty. So to be involved in some kinds of communication, dialogue, and problem solving on an international level about nuclear weapons is an important part of the treaty process and one that can help manage all of this uncertainty that we are now experiencing in international relations. So finally, let me just talk about what we can do, what you and I can do. Um, uh, Sometimes people think that because we're not all physicists and experts in nuclear weapons, we don't have a role. But I think that there is a role for members of the public and for political leaders in demanding negotiations and treaties to keep us safe from the destruction of nuclear weapons. Um, Maybe we can use at this point this growing sense of crisis and uncertainty to bring attention to the dangers of nuclear weapons, to educate actually political leaders as well as the public about their effects, about the humanitarian effects and the dangers of them. We all have a stake in this. None of us want to be attacked. We all want to flourish, and we don't want to see the use of these weapons to destroy whole cities and regions of the world. We might also emphasize the economic rationale to reduce spending on nuclear weapons, arms races, waste resources. The nuclear weapons states have, from time to time, said that nuclear and should never be fought. And so we have these weapons. We say they're for deterrence, but it's not clear that we ever can actually use them. And yet we're engaged in arms races, which I would say waste resources, which could be used for other purposes and to increase economic well-being for all of us. There is an opportunity, I think, to focus in on these humanitarian effects. There is a treaty, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was signed in 2017. 93 states have ratified it, and it calls for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. It calls for the complete destruction of nuclear weapons, and really is a follow-on to the UN Charter. So this has been a long-term process. There have been many who want to see the end of nuclear weapons. And in fact, in the United States, public opinion polls over the years have shown that large majorities in the United States really do not want nuclear weapons. 60%, 70% of the public say they don't want to have nuclear weapons. So this may be an opportunity to pressure leaders to act on those public preferences. It's always, in times of crisis, it's sometimes thought that there can be opportunities because we have focused the attention of people. And there's nothing, I think, like the possibility of nuclear war to begin to focus everybody's attention on this very destructive technology. So let me stop there and thank you again for your patience with me. And thank you again for offering me the opportunity to talk about this extremely significant development in nuclear weapons management. I welcome questions and conversation, so I'll turn it back to Nikki. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. I really enjoyed this talk, and I'm going to jump in with some questions that we have in the chat.
Mhm.
So, one of the questions is why haven't we seen recent significant grassroots movements towards a push for nuclear nonproliferation?
That's an excellent question. I think we did have them in the past, of course, in the 1980s especially, and which some people suggest led to the end of the Cold War, actually, along with our European colleagues. I think it faded. The nuclear weapons faded from public view. The Cold War was over. The battle between the United States and Soviet Union seemed to be waning. And so I think there was a sense that we didn't really need to focus on them. And we did have substantial reductions over that period. So many people, I think, felt we took care of that problem. Um, I think people are understanding now that in fact it still is a problem and an increasing one actually. So I think that in fact there may be an opportunity now to begin to get people's attention. People are busy though. They have lots of things to think about, and they have everyday problems of healthcare, jobs, childcare, a number of things. So I think that there's, probably hesitation to get involved in things that seem beyond our control. It's also the case that I think that what is called the nuclear establishment doesn't really encourage citizens to be involved. It doesn't mean we shouldn't push, but there isn't an openness to public opinion about nuclear weapons unless there is mass protest. It's the only policy that is based in secrecy. Um, Tax policy, health policy, education policy, all these policies, you have access to all the data you want. In terms of nuclear weapons, they are secrets. The only reason we know how many nuclear weapons we have and there are around the world is because Hans Christensen and his colleagues at the Federation of American Scientists have provided us with these estimates. These are not official figures. They're really quite accurate, but it's only because an outside independent source has told us. So these are meant to be kept secret, and we have to deal with that. And part of the reason I think we have so little protest is that there's not enough information that we can address, I think.
Thank you. The next question, if there is a renewed interest in resource allocation to nuclear programs, what are your thoughts on the possibilities of implementing other types of technology, such as molten salt reactors, in order to favor civil nuclear programs and avoid the risk of proliferation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question as well. There are a number of new technologies that are being developed, and especially I think the possibility of small modular reactors in the United States, which would also have design features which would allow for which would probably prevent nuclear weapons proliferation, are certainly in the offing. The major problem with nuclear proliferation and the transfer of civilian nuclear to military is the problem of the material that's used. And in both weapons and civilian technologies, highly enriched uranium and plutonium are used. In civilian nuclear reactors, of course, it's low enriched uranium. But if you have centrifuge technology, you can pretty easily increase the level from 3 to 5% to 90, 80, or 90%, which is what you need for nuclear weapons. So the very technology that's used for civilian nuclear energy is also useful for, is what you need for nuclear weapons. And the same with plutonium. Nuclear reactors create plutonium as they go about their business of heating water, heating and boiling water to make electricity. So the problem is more in the centrifuge technology and the reactors, which do produce the materials for nuclear weapons. And it's not clear that molten salt reactors would help with that. The inspections are important. There are other ways of doing it. United Arab Emirates has experimented with another way of having civilian nuclear power without the risks of nuclear weapons proliferation. It's a longer discussion and it's an important question, but I'm not sure that current designs will actually completely solve this problem of proliferation.
Great. I think we have time for one more question and then we'll wrap up. So, given the history of aggressive nations, thinking about Russia into the Ukraine and also the US and Iran, sort of demonstrating that nations not possessing nuclear capability are at a particular risk for this conventional attack, what real hope is there for a continued nonproliferation appetite in those states?
Well, I think we're giving them incentives to develop nuclear weapons. um, and that's unfortunate. It's happened before when the George W. Bush administration attacked Iraq, for instance. Iran and North Korea both thought they were at risk. And in fact, they were called part of an axis of evil. And North Korea did withdraw from the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty and did develop their own nuclear weapons. They're up to about as many as 60 now. So, yes, taking military action against countries that we may believe have nuclear weapons, in fact, Iraq didn't, um, uh, does lead other countries, those who are vulnerable, to think that a nuclear deterrent, a nuclear weapon, would be helpful in that case. And in fact, the behavior of the United States and Russia seems to suggest that that's the case. So we're by these military actions, and I think that's what the question was getting after, by engaging in these attacks on countries without nuclear weapons, we are in a sense encouraging proliferation, very counterproductive, and we need to find other ways to resolve the problems that we see and are faced with. And especially, I think great powers have a responsibility, nuclear powers have a responsibility to think very hard about their actions, especially against non-nuclear weapon states.
Thank you. I know we're past time. I thought I saw somebody with their hand up. If you wanted to go ahead and ask real quick, I think we can let that
Mhm.
go and then we'll end.
Sure, if that's okay. Hi, it's really nice to meet you, Dr. Benedict. I'm Sahar Khan, and I'm based in Washington, D.C. I'm currently a non-resident fellow at the Institute of Global Affairs, and before that, I was at the Stimson Center, and so I've been sort of in the non-proliferation world for a while, I guess. But I focus more on South Asia, and so I wanted to ask you, of course, India and Pakistan in the nuclear space, even often they're the dyad that sort of are. I don't know what to call them, an outlier, or, since they're not part of the NPT, they're not really part of the non-proliferation regime as we know it. I was wondering now with START sort of gone and in this world that we're in, that seems a little more proliferation um, prone. Do you think that there could be any lessons that the India-Pakistan example could offer that could at least perhaps encourage China to stop modernizing or potentially discourage South Korea and Japan from acquiring nuclear weapons?
I think that's an interesting idea. The India, Pakistan, as I understand it, have assured each other that they will not use nuclear weapons. There's a kind of deconfliction process that goes on because conflicts in between Pakistan and India in very recent years. And yet there hasn't been a nuclear exchange. So, yeah, what is the formula there, and what are they doing to ensure that those nuclear weapons aren't used? And I think with India and China, I mean, India's nuclear program was, in fact, put in place in part because they saw in the 1960s, China's nuclear arsenals growing and wanted to ensure that they weren't, that they had a deterrent themselves. So I think it's, if they were willing to provide a model for how we go about that, that would be very useful. But there are lots of reasons for countries to want to embark on nuclear weapons programs at this time because of the unraveling of the nuclear nonproliferation treaty, because of the behavior of the most powerful nuclear states. It's a very difficult time. And if there was a possibility that India and Pakistan would take some leadership on this, that would be wonderful. The middle powers, so-called middle powers, have been very active on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and especially Mexico, Austria, and Norway were instrumental in pulling together developing countries, those who felt they might not have a kind of a stake in nuclear weapons, pointing out to them how dreadful all-out nuclear war would be for everyone, not just for the nuclear states, was a very important step forward. So yes, if it were possible for India and Pakistan to come together to even in the face of the conflicts and the cross-border tensions that there have been, I think that would be an extremely useful undertaking.
Okay, well, we are a little past time. Thank you all for staying on. Thank you for your wonderful questions. Professor Benedict, thank you for a really engaging session. I appreciate that we have some takeaways and some positive things that or steps forward that we could potentially take. Thank you all so much. I will be following up in the coming days, and we hope to see you at an event in the future. Take
Great.
care.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.